You're listening to Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for this show. So it looks like now, after months of being off and not happening, even though it hasn't been confirmed, according to an interview that Patty Jenkins just gave not too long ago, the way is clear for her to actually return to Rogue Squadron. I always get that messed up. So, essentially, for those of you guys who don't know, Rogue Squadron was actually set to be the next film, which I think was supposed to be initially released at the end of last year. And then, of course, COVID hit, and that pushed things forward. Mm-hmm. And then I think that they were going to do it this year. And then finally, they settled on next year. It was supposed to come out like next December or something. And then suddenly, for some inexplicable reason, it just seemed like they pulled the plug. That Lucasfilm just said, you know what, we're not doing this anymore. So in a recent interview that Patty Jenkins gave, especially with Wonder Woman 3 up in the air, her whole thing was like, no, I was just trying to do Wonder Woman 3, and there was another thing that she was doing too or whatever, and it was kind of like, I don't know, it could have actually gotten a little bit confused, or there could have been a situation where scheduling conflicts may have arisen. There's all kinds of things that have been talked about and discussed. But in this recent interview, she started talking about how it could be back on.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of good news in a way. I mean, it seems like there was a bunch of bad news in this, but to me, this is good news because one, it shows that once again, Star Wars is paying attention to making sure they have a good story. That's what it sounds like. Mm-hmm. And then they want to make sure they deliver a quality product, which is, at the end of the day, that's what we all want. I hate the fact that it kind of had to be do that whole start and stop thing, because once again, it just makes the property look, unsettled or uncertain about certain things. But I'm happy that it's at least back on because, I mean, I think the concept is really cool. And I really want to see, a lot of aerial, I'm into all the aerial stuff anyway, from like Top Gun and all that. So it's just kind of in that same vein. So I'm really glad to see that this project is back on. I'm really curious to see what she presents.
Well, and that's the other thing. So for people, again, because this hasn't even really been discussed much in the last at least year or so, where you can almost think of this as Star Wars version of Top Gun. And I sometimes wonder if the success of Top Gun Maverick is what maybe made everybody at Lucasfilm go, maybe we should take a second look at that Rogue Squadron thing, because I do find it a little strange that it's after the success of that film that, suddenly everybody's all about it. But that's basically what it is. And the interesting thing about this particular movie is the fact that it takes place after Episode 9. That was another key thing. Because anybody that's followed Star Wars for a long time, if you followed the Expanded Universe books, you know that they actually had this whole, Rogue Squadron thing that was born in the Expanded Universe. And Wedge Antilles was the lead of it and everything. And, of course, I mean, at first Luke Skywalker was, but then he sort of turned it over to Wedge. And once he decided to focus more on the whole Jedi thing. So there's a really deep, deep basis for Rogue Squadron. So when Disney decided to make it a part of their canon and basically glean it from the Expanded Universe, they made that one critical change, that it was going to actually take place after the Rise of Skywalker. So there's a lot of questions that come from that. I mean, yeah, we understand that it's going to be this whole focusing on this group of X-Wing pilots and everything like that, and so obviously there's going to be a Top Gun-ish element to that. However, what was always interesting to me, even when this thing was first announced, is the fact that it takes place up after Episode 9. I'm really wondering what the landscape's going to look like You know, I mean, we have Hosnian Prime's been destroyed. They haven't really focused too much in the sequel trilogy after that. You know, I mean, of course we saw that Starkiller Base wiped out Hosnian Prime and a bunch of other planets that were basically the Coruscant of the new, the new Republic, I guess. So there's a lot of unanswered questions to me just about the era, the timelines, I guess just the overall galaxy. You know, what's this going to look like? Even beyond the stories of this pretty much ragtag group of X-Wing pilots.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of pretty much hit it on the head as far as what this movie is about, and it's kind of like a recruit thing. They're looking for pilots. I guess they're kind of trying to rebuild the. I don't know if you want to call it the Rebel Alliance, because at this point, post episode 9, I don't know if it's still the resist point, because the order now is gone. So can you really call it a resistance or what? So whatever this, I guess it's maybe a public, or however they're choosing to classify this.
Well, I would think it would
they're
have to be.
yeah, too. But mm, they're pretty much trying to figure out, like, okay, we need new pilots, and so basically the story that would introduce a new generation of starfighter pilots as they earn their wings and risk their lives and boundary pushing high speed thrill ride to move the saga forward. And so yeah, it kind of has that Top Gun vibe, but it's almost like in a weird way, kind of military-ish kind of movie. So that's another thing too, along the lines, of a Rogue One, right? We've now seen that element in Star Wars. We're more on the military aspects of it, where you Andor, Rogue One, um, that whole. So, are they going to now just give us a full-on military movie where we're actually going to just see them training and becoming pilots and the rigors that it comes to go, into that arena? Will there be a Poe Dameron? I think I remember Oscar Isaac. He wasn't really too thrilled about returning back to Star Wars, but then now he seems to warmed up back. He seems to be warming up to that idea again. So maybe they could be bringing him back for a cameo or some stuff. So I'm
Well, it
really
would be
curious to
nice
see,
if
what this plans out.
yeah, and if it's after episode 9, obviously it's almost too bad that he has that stance or whatever. We'll see if it's softened. I don't know if it's softened enough to actually just do a cameo, or could they bring him back, because Poe would be the logical guy to run this thing. Okay, so Voyager says, "Hey guys, off topic, but can I ask a question?" Yes. I mean, what else?
We're here
can
for
I...
all your needs.
Yeah,
Well,
I
not
mean,
all, but
yeah,
as many as we can actually
right.
feasibly handle.
Yeah, exactly. So, while we wait for that to come in, yeah, I mean, I just think that Poe would be the guy that would make the most sense given the framework of the sequel trilogy. Now, of course, the biggest problem with the whole sequel trilogy thing is, I don't know, it's one of those things that people want to see it softly or even a hard reboot of it, because a lot of people didn't like it. They didn't like the direction that it went. On the other hand, if you start making things after it, particularly something that's close to it, do you acknowledge it in any way by putting a Poe Dameron in there, or do you try to skirt around it? Maybe you mention his name, kind of like you said. I don't know. Maybe get somebody
Yeah.
else, and because I don't know if they would really. I mean, Poe would be the guy that would make the most sense, but I don't really know if they want to go there, because that would be acknowledging the sequel trilogy quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean, unless I mean, I can think of some creative ways that maybe if you're going to bring him in, there's a way to do it. But it just depends. Like you said, you make a valid point. Is how are they going to portray the sequel trilogy. Are they going to acknowledge it or are they not? In doing so, because then you still kind of almost have to ask back the question, well, where's Finn? Because if you bring Poe in, Finn was kind of more of the military guy as well. Now, granted, he wasn't a pilot per se, not like Poe was, but he could be. He did some flying, and he and well, I won't say he flew, but he actually did some shooting in the TIE fighter that they were in, and some skirmishes like that. And even in the Millennium Falcon, he was the shooter. So you kind of almost have to wonder, okay, if this is more the Air Force side of things, I could see a Poe Dameron being in that, and maybe Finn is more ground. Maybe he's better because he was a stormtrooper. Maybe he'd be better fit for ground battle or something like that. So, that could be the case too. But yeah, it's really going to be interesting to see what this is, because, and I also often wonder, is it going to reflect on the very popular video game that came out in the 90s?
Oh, right,
Rogue Squadron. Yeah, the video game, that was a huge game. I remember being a kid and wanting that game. I never got it, but
well, that's a good point.
Christmas
too.
is here, but
I don't know why I forgot about the video game, because that was every bit as huge. And they also had the whole Rogue Squadron line of just like standalone novels too. I mean, there was just a lot of content where they focused on it, particularly in the expanded universe, which of course includes the games. Okay, so basically, Voyager says, I'm getting roasted on Twitter, and I deactivated. He, of course, corrected his spelling in a separate post, but he's like, did they win? Did who win?
Yeah, I'm saying, yeah.
You're going to have to give us some context.
Yeah.
I really don't know. And I haven't really checked, social media hasn't really been something I've been following over the last few days. But if you get us some clarity on what you're talking about, on, kind of to quote Robot Chicken, who is they? And when what? Yeah, put that into a context for us, and we'll probably address it. But here's something that was interesting to me. And this whole thing puts a lot into context. So apparently Daisy Ridley had a meeting with Lucasfilm very recently. She had like a lunch meeting or something that they were talking to her. And naturally, there was a lot of speculation on, well, what could it be? Because it could be something as big as a film. It could be maybe an appearance in a TV series or something, like one of the Disney Plus shows that are being popped out every few months. It could be maybe her lending her voice to a game. I mean, there's all kinds of different things that could be about. It could even be business related, right? Like some licensing issues or something like that. However, since we aren't talking about Rogue Squadron, and this story just happens to come right around the time that Rogue Squadron hasn't really been announced. I should make that clear. It's not officially back on schedule. What it is it's in active development. And look, anything could be in development, and it could be in development for years or whatever. But the point is...
And at various stages.
Yes, exactly, at various stages. So you just don't really know. That doesn't mean that it's scheduled or anything like that, or that it's definitely going to go into production. It's just, it's in active development, which means there is things that are happening and it is moving. And so it is something that Patty Jenkins mentioned in that interview that she was definitely eyeing at some point. But she more or less, if I remember correctly, left that interview by just saying, look, if they decide to move further with it, all they have to do is call, basically. But, what's Daisy Ridley doing there? Well, and, this thing does take place after episode 10 or 9. So, just saying, we could see a Rey appearance in this thing. I doubt that. I mean, I think that they are courting Daisy Ridley to make more Rey appearances in other films or maybe some other series. But, thought I would bring it up because it is interesting, the timing of this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is that with Daisy Ridley, I can see her being maybe a part of it because originally, and this is why I brought up the video game, is that was a Luke thing. Luke was still of Rogue. Of course, we know from the original trilogy, but even afterwards, he was still kind of the Rogue Squadron team at some point, and we know Rey can fly because we've heard, use the Millennium Falcon on numerous occasions. So we know she has a knowledge of ships and whatnot. So maybe, I mean, she could be brought in to do it, and maybe, but I don't know. I think people probably would want to see her furthering her adventures or furthering her career as becoming a Jedi. So not entirely sure, unless she's on a mission somewhere and she's trying to do something, and Rogue Squadron has to back her up.
Well,
Or
it would have to
something.
be
I could
something
see
like
that.
that. Yeah, it would have to be something like that. I mean, she's not going to be flying for Rogue Squadron because, like you said, I mean, her path obviously is completely different, and that was even established at the end of the sequel trilogy.
But it would be cool though because because if you think about it, because it mirrors Luke, because Luke was to become a Jedi, but we kind of established that he was a pilot. Same as Anakin, really. Anakin was always kind of known as a pilot, and that's one of the first things Han kind of noticed about her, because that's the first thing we really saw her really truly do was pilot the Millennium Falcon. So,
but in both
not to say
cases, though. So here's what
Mhm.
you got to look at. With the Anakin situation, the Jedi Order was in full blast, and they actually had their own pilots. When Luke was
True.
doing it, he was starting to rebuild the Jedi Order, but he only had like a few students or something like that, and he was still kind of like and that is a little bit more similar to Rey because they're kind of like they got one foot into being a war hero and another foot into, okay, now I got to start this whole Jedi thing. But she's a lot further along, though, at the end of the sequel trilogy with the Force than Luke was at the end of Return of the Jedi. Even though he does eventually become a Grandmaster. And then, of course, you have the whole problem of comparing the expanded universe with the current canon. But
True.
you could definitely make the correlation. I just don't think that beyond maybe, I don't know, a cameo or something, I don't think that she would be a core member of the Rogue Squadron, quite the same way Luke was in the expanded universe version. And even then, he kind of was, but he was really more doing that stuff during the original trilogy in a way, when they would cover missions and stuff. Because a lot of those video games, I think one took place like around the time of Empire Strikes Back and everything.
Like 1 year after Battle of Yavin.
Or something like that. Like kind of in between A New Hope and Empire and stuff like that. So, I mean, there was stuff where it was a little different. I mean, and again, the expanded universe did cover the whole thing with Luke, and he was kind of sort of the unofficial head of it. And when he got too wrapped up into having to do the Jedi stuff, that's when he said, okay.
Pass it over to Wedge, you take it.
Yeah. Because Wedge would lead this stuff a lot of times anyway. And Luke, of course, was there, and Luke would probably give him intel and stuff like that. And then, of course, he started working in conjunction with it. But a lot of it is, too, that we do see that X-Wing. That's why we all got chills when we saw Luke's X-Wing underwater in The Last Jedi, was because it's kind of like his thing. That's his Millennium Falcon. So, yeah. I mean, we'll just have to see. I don't know.
So so we're talking about the story right now, but on the flip side of that, well, not necessarily on the flip, but on another side of that, what do you think about like Lucasfilm as far as the announcing it before you're sure that the treatment is right? Because it seems like that was the problem. that they didn't like the treatment or something was up with the script and the treatment, but they announced it premature. It's like they announced it prematurely. So do you think Lucas needs to look at how they're marketing things and kind of holding things back until they know for sure that they're going to do it, or is the script and everything is pretty much greenlit before they release it to the public, versus kind of getting our hopes up for stuff and then they never deliver it or they pull it off the table?
Well, and I think but you got to remember, that's not what happened here. Patty Jenkins was just asked in an interview about everything, because basically the whole DCEU is up in arms right now. They just fired Henry Cavill as Superman again after they announced that he was back. So what happened on that, if you guys have missed that, basically he was told in October, go ahead and announce your return to the Superman role. And basically he quit the Witcher series because of it and everything else. Well, over the last week or so or something, these new studio head guys came in and then said no. Now, he's still, I think he's going to appear in some like extended type stuff or whatever. But again, they've got a lot to worry about. Patty Jenkins' Wonder Woman 3 and a couple other projects have been put on hold now. And so what's been happening is, in light of all that, they asked her, what about Rogue Squadron? Is that pretty much dead or whatever? And her whole thing was like, no, it's not dead. It's just in active development. I was doing another movie, and then I was going to have Wonder Woman 3. So, I don't know. So that wasn't really necessarily the case here. As far as them prematurely announcing it, because it's not officially back on schedule. Again, if you read the interview, it's in active development. Lucasfilm has not officially said, yes, it's back in production, it's a go. It's just in active development. And her whole thing is like, yeah, if you want me there, I'm there. So, but you do bring up a good point, though, because that's been their problem all along. Right? They announce something, and then, it's like we either wait 10 years for it or it never comes up. But I don't know if they're really doing that anymore. The last time they did that was really bad, which of course is part of when this Rogue Squadron thing actually hit, was, remember the Lando series that was announced? Mm-hmm. Where'd that go?
Yeah.
And even at the time, they never expanded beyond a logo, really. Which could have just been like a Lego Star Wars film for all we knew. Voyager's got an interesting comment. He says, this movie news is so exhausting. There's been no concrete Star Wars movie news, whether it be projects or directors. Yeah, that's because it's starting to look like the next project's going to be like in 2024 at the earliest. And we still don't know what it's going to be.
Well, what I was referencing earlier, about the issues was that I'm referencing an article that we got the story from, and it said, at that point, according to Jenkins' letter, something changed that pushed the film down the line. In a recent episode of The Hot Mic, Jeff Snyder said that her story treatment had issues, which could have prompted Lucasfilm to halt development until they had the script in a better shape.
Oh, you're talking about when they initially bumped it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when they famously initially bumped it, that wasn't what happened. What happened was the movie that she had done had flopped at the box office. Wonder Woman 84 was a disaster. And once again, it's kind of something which is along the lines of the same issue that you're talking about, right? It's kind of like, because that's what happened with Colin Trevorrow. I forgot what movie it was, but he had done Jurassic World or whatever. They loved him. They hired him. They said, yes, you're a guy. He started actually working on episode 9. Then he did another movie that famously flopped, and then they said, nope, just kidding. You're not the person. And they did the same thing with Patty Jenkins. Yeah, sure, they came up with the whole, there were treatment issues, and maybe there were, but that was the real reason why, they did that. If Wonder Woman 84 had been a resounding critical success, they probably would have been Well, we probably would have had the movie by now, other than COVID.
Man, don't you think it's kind of hilarious in a way that Lucasfilm will fire directors because of a film that flopped, but they keep Ryan Johnson on, even though Knives Out was a success, but the movie he did for them divided their whole franchise, and yet they allowing him to do a whole trilogy.
Well, because
Like,
they loved what he did. I think the bigger problem is the fact that Kathleen Kennedy feels differently from the fan base. She's not quite as in touch with the fans. I mean, I think that I think she likes Star Wars, and she would, if you asked her, is she a fan of it, she would say yes. But she's not a fan the same way as Favreau and Filoni. People like us who grew up on it and then later became filmmakers and then, started to do it. I mean, she was working with George for a long time at Lucasfilm. Now, it's kind of odd that Filoni is under his wing. Kathleen Kennedy is under his wing. But again, she was under his wing more as like a producer and studio head. He was basically grooming her to be the next head, business head. He was grooming Filoni to be the next creative director, if you will. So that's why I think that sometimes we get these differences in that. It's not so much that, because that's true, right? Because Ryan Johnson is the guy that really divided the fan base. He gets a free pass and a trilogy.
Right. That's what I'm saying.
And then not only that, he was virtually untouched during the whole making of it. I mean, poor Gareth Edwards, even J.J. Abrams to a degree, they're being micromanaged. They bring in Tony Gilroy to reshoot a lot of Rogue One. Or you get the case of Lord and Miller where they're fired 80% into it. Ryan Johnson, yeah, he just gets to go off in a corner and make this incredibly divisive film, and nobody says anything. But I think a lot of it...
have the main character, Mark Hamill, kind of complaining about it.
Yeah.
And they don't whatever.
Exactly.
And they still make the movie.
Okay, so here's a question then from Voyager. He says, what does in development even mean? It's sitting on a shelf collecting dust. Patty's letter was so dumb. Well, yes and no. I mean, so in development does mean that, but active development does not. And that's a distinction that you have to make. If something is in active development, it means that, sure, it's sitting on a shelf, but it's really more like sitting on somebody's to-do pile. People are actively working on it and developing it to the point to where they can get a green light, right? So they're constantly exchanging ideas. They're coming up with different treatments and maybe some script ideas, some story ideas. They're floating things probably past the story group or whatever, all in hopes of having somebody like Kathleen Kennedy herself or whoever does it over there say, yes, we're going to put that into production. That's going to be on our 2024 or whatever slate. Whereas just in development means that a spec script or something like that's been written and an idea has been floated out there and it's just sitting on the studio shelf until they decide they want to do something with it. You can have something in development, doesn't mean it's going to get made. In fact, you can have something in active development, it doesn't mean it's going to get made, but there's a better chance.
Yeah, absolutely. Perfect explanation. Question for you. Do you feel like Patty Jenkins is the person for this movie?
Not really. So here's the thing. I mean, I love the original Wonder Woman, right? Then I wondered, well, why was Wonder Woman 84 so abysmal in comparison? Then I found out Patty Jenkins actually came in later in the first movie. It was actually somebody else who had really, I forgot who it was, but it really moved that thing along. So, I mean, to me, it would be whoever did the Top Gun movie. That's the person that should get the Rogue Squadron thing. I mean, if you really, going, hey, we really love this thing, it was awesome, then yeah, get the same team behind you. On the other hand, though, there is a flip side to that, because this is a story that's near and dear to her because of her father and all that stuff. And there is a personalized element to it. And it's not that she's necessarily a bad filmmaker, too. She's actually had a handful of really good movies as well. So I don't know if I feel 100% confident in it. I'd be willing to bet that, 80% into the shooting, they're probably going to fire her and get somebody like Tony Gilroy or something. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, Henry Cavill's gonna come in and
yeah, he could play the next
here's my
Sith Lord.
thing. Right. Here's my thing though with Patty. It's not even so much with Patty. I think it's more so with Lucasfilm. I don't always think it's wise for your director to be the writer as well. Some people are talented and can do both, right? But I don't think that everybody is truly designed to write and direct. I mean, and quite frankly, we know the master himself, so to speak, George Lucas, is notorious for that. Great writer. He could write great stories, but directing, not the greatest. But he delivered, A New Hope to us. And it wasn't really until like after a real true director like Steven Spielberg, I won't say a true director, but somebody like Steven Spielberg punched up and fixed, and even his wife kind of, contributed to the success of A New Hope. So I'm wondering, like, when you have directors who are trying to write the story and shoot it, it's like they become nose blind to a lot of the issues sometimes. And I think that what Star Wars needs to do is to have someone write the story, make sure that's concrete, and punch that up, and then get people who can who are actors, directors, who can really bring out things in these characters to make it really truly pop. What do you think?
Oh, I totally agree, but I mean, that doesn't necessarily save anybody, because Lawrence Kasdan and his son wrote the script to Solo, and Lord and Miller were making it, and then look what happened. So even when you do separate the two, I mean, the results are probably better, but it just really depends. I mean, if you look at the Andor series, same guy that wrote it directed it. So,
yeah,
I mean, I guess it really just depends on the situation. But if you're talking about as a hard and fast rule, then yeah, I would definitely say it's safer to have somebody who really understands the franchise to write it, and then bring in somebody whose style matches the story you're trying to tell to direct it, and vet them out a little bit. I mean, how many times have people brought it in because on paper, you look at the other films that a person has done or whatever it is, and it's just like, no, you need to actually make wise decisions when it comes to who's directing, because it's not just a question of do they understand films, it's do they understand Star Wars. Now you can go back and say, yeah, but what about Irvin Kershner and Richard Marquand, because Star Wars is still very new when those guys did it. But my answer to that has always been, well, yeah, because there's a meme that goes around that said when Mark Hamill was shooting A New Hope, he had never even seen a Star Wars film before or something like that. It's kind of like a...
Mm-hmm.
And that's because there's a bunch of guys who are responsible for being the architects of the framework of what everybody else is operating within. So now that's what you have to do, I mean, you can look at a guy and say, well, how did Irvin Kershner? I mean, he's just a director. He came in and he did it. Yeah, he did. But you didn't have that much history behind you yet. See, that's the difference. Now you have all this history, you have all this lore, you got all this, continuity, you got a lot of things that you have to take in, you know?
Not only that, but you also had George Lucas there. I mean, he's explaining to you what his story
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, that's
You're
true.
hearing it directly from the horse's mouth at that point. You know, it's
Hmm.
different trying to interpret what George would do. You know, that's a little bit. And Filoni can probably be is the best person to do it because he's so closely with George that and we've seen it that he gets it.
Yeah.
So I think that's another big piece of the puzzle too.
Hmm. Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are all these things that. That's why, honestly, it's the nice thing about the Disney Plus shows is if they mess something up or if fans don't like it or whatever, you got another one coming up in probably another 3 or 4 months, maybe a year. You know, whereas with the films, it's just like it's a bigger, it just has more weight to it. And because of
Yeah.
that, you know, it just further divides everything. So right now, the Star Wars film franchise is in somewhat of a disarray. It's basically a mess, if we really want to be honest here. And
Hmm.
we don't even know what's coming up. We don't have a schedule. In some ways, that makes me feel better because it tells me that, hey, they're really trying to take their time and do it right this time. But will they? That really honestly remains to be seen. It really does.
Yeah, I mean, with Patty Jenkins, bringing something as cool and unique as Rogue One, or Rogue, you got me doing it now, Rogue Squadron.
It's easy to do, man. It's easy to
I
do.
know, man. Yeah, bringing something like Rogue Squadron. I mean, the concept of it is very cool.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think it's, you know, one of those things that's like, okay, people like getting engaged with different genres, and we talked about this, all the time about genre films, whatnot, right? And you can do a lot of that within Star Wars, and it still feel like a Star Wars film or series or whatnot. And so I think if you really truly understand, um, it seems to me like she's pulling some things from her father, his stories that that he may have told her about his time in the military and serving the country or whatnot, and that's all fine, well, and good. But you know, if you're not going to have lightsabers, the Force, and all that, much like Andor, you really have to punch up that character development. Like we really have to care about these these pilots, right? And I don't know if she's really gonna be able to draw that out. Just given some of the things that she's done with other films, I mean, I could see giving this to more of a, um, oh, what's his name? This dropped out of my head. The guy who they brought in to replace Solo,
Oh, Ron
the
Howard.
director, Ron Howard. Thank you. Yeah, bringing Ron Howard in. See, I could see him doing that because he's an
Mm-hmm.
actress director. And I
Mm-hmm.
think you need to go with people who are more established. Once you come back to the films, you need to get people who are firmly established directors who with almost without question. It's almost like automatic that you're going to get a good film out of it. Because Solo was a good film, and I think just because it wasn't marketed properly and a lot of things leaked about the issues they were having, it didn't do well. Um,
Oh, not to
as well as
mention
they
the
would have
fact that,
liked financially.
well, it was 6 months after The Last Jedi, too. I
Yeah,
mean,
that too.
honestly, we
Right.
went over that in that one show that we did. I mean, I'm sure that has a
Yeah.
lot to do with it. So,
Absolutely,
not to
absolutely.
mention the fact that Ron Howard didn't even start it, right? I mean, I think that it would have even been more amazing if he was the director from the very beginning and he was the one
Mhm.
doing all the setting up and everything and making sure. I mean, basically, he just came in when there was 80% of a film shot and went back and reshot a bunch of stuff in order to frame the story that would make both Lucasfilm happy, but then also would be cohesive enough that the film would actually be good.
Right, and you just got like you make a very valid point just now because if he could do that with something that was kind of broken, as everybody says, and it
Mm-hmm.
ended up being a great film, how much better would it have been if he would have been there since day one? And that's what I mean. Like, do something like if you're trying to bring fans back into the theater to see Star Wars again, I think you need somebody who's got the pedigree of a Ron Howard, Spielberg, somebody like that. People where you can pretty much bet your bottom dollar that it's going to be delivered well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's again, this was supposed to be the first one back after the Skywalker saga. This is supposed to be the first movie that we were gonna have after Rise of Skywalker. So this is gonna be that do or die. But whether it's this or a different one, doesn't matter. Whichever movie they come out with now, that's gonna be the one that sets the tone, not only within the universe, but also if they don't get it right, it could now you can actually start to do some real damage to the franchise.
Absolutely.
And some of it could even be irreparable, or I mean, you basically are at a point to where even though there's been a lot of damage dealt to the franchise, you could still come back from it. It still has enough flexibility and resiliency that you can come back from it, but this is going to be that do or die moment now, whichever film they come out with. That's why I actually thought that Rogue Squadron was a good choice, because much like a Top Gun, it would appeal to a wide variety of people, and you don't necessarily need to be a Star Wars fan to get it. You know? And that's why it would be a great choice, but again, I don't know if we don't really know. Is that what they're going to go with or not?
Well, yeah, I mean that's a great point because, like you said, Top Gun is a widely acclaimed I would say franchise, but film, and that people, a lot of people can get into that, just like people got into Andor, and I think the fact that when you have something that's wide sweeping like that, where it doesn't have, if you're not confident in doing the Force, the lightsabers, all that type of Sith, and all that type of stuff, then yeah, it's better off to do a genre specific thing where you could play to a person's strength and do something like that where it's like, all right, make this a great movie within your wheelhouse, and then start developing people, or have somebody like Filoni start working on, finding a director, or maybe he himself step into the chair and finally crafts that's going to be on the silver screen.
I mean, if it were me, I'd get Filoni to write it and Bryce Dallas Howard to direct it. That's probably what I would do. I would probably get that combination of people to do the next film. To me, I mean, you're still not going to get any guarantees, but to me, that would more or less guarantee that at least you're going to get a really good story out of it. And a lot of people will point to the ups and downs of particularly the Book of Boba Fett, because that was the one that Filoni really had the most to do with other than The Mandalorian. But you also have to understand that even a limited series is a little bit different than writing a film, And I just think that would be a really good combination for a film. I mean, there's a couple others in there too, but that just seems to me to be the best combination. Like, all the favorite episodes I've had are generally that combination. So to me, whatever you do, because for a while it was going to be Benioff and Weiss were going to do a Star Wars film. Then there was that time where it was going to be Kevin Feige or Taika Waititi, or I mean, there's all these names that have been thrown around, and a lot of these guys have been interested in doing it. And a lot of people have said, yeah, I am going to work on a Star Wars film, but we don't know which one's first. See, that's the thing.
Well, yeah, it goes back to with I think it was Voyager who says, like, they don't give us anything, like, as far as anything concrete. It's everything is kind of all over the place, and I think that's what makes everybody so uneasy. I mean, we know Ahsoka's coming, we know Mandalorian 3 is coming, season 3 is coming, Bad Batch is on the way. So we have those, and at least in that regard, we have some comfort, right?
Yeah,
But
the television thing is
films,
firm,
yeah, right. But the film stuff, that's where everybody, like you said, and that's where Star Wars lives. That's where it was born, So that's what people are accustomed to seeing Star Wars. So if you're going to ask fans to return to the theaters to see these movies, you got to come out the blocks like smoking. And
Yep.
I think that it'd be in their best interest to find somebody. I mean, Patty could be around. She could be in this, I just don't have them. I mean, she could prove me wrong, and I hope she does. I mean, I'm not wishing any bad or ill will on her at all. I'm just saying I'm not as confident in her. But I mean, if she knocks it out the park, kudos. I'll give her laurels, she deserves. But right now, I'm kind of, I don't know.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, of course, the important thing isn't what we think, is what you guys think. So, one of the things that we brought up today, it's not even so much, are you excited for the possibility of Rogue Squadron to come, or any of that. The question, I think, really comes down to, if it does get made, it's kind of her story, so I guess it more or less would have to be, but do you feel confident that she can pull off a good Star Wars film? Let us know in the comments section. All right, but I think it's going to wrap it up. So Monday, I'm going to try to get this done. You were talking about we were going to start a whole series of what makes Star Wars kind of a thing going.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. And what were we going to try to do for Monday's episode then?
The first one is just, we're going to kind of delve into what makes Star Wars what it is. So the concept of it, the story tropes that Star Wars brings, all that, and a lot of it has to do with Dave Filoni, his explanation on that from this the series The Galley, which is on Disney Plus.
Is that or the Gallery?
Galley, something like that.
The Galley, well, it could be in a kitchen if you're hungry. But I will say this, that's probably good, because anytime we slap Filoni's name on any of our videos, our viewership goes up. So I guess that's a first one. No, coming in right at the end for David. He says, hello, gentlemen. After Andor and that Bad Batch trailer, let's go Star Wars. They're ready. Okay. Well, let's hope so. Again, we're not really down on them. It's just, this is going to be an important thing. So they have to get it right. I think that's the thing. But I will say there are a lot of things that are encouraging, the way they're doing the High Republic, the way that they're tying in a lot of the books with the comics, with the TV shows, with all that. I mean, they're starting, I think, to get it. And they're starting to make good decisions. They still make bad decisions, but there have been more good ones than bad ones. So let's just hope that that's a trajectory that they follow. And again, we are going to talk Monday night at 8 live. We're going to be dealing with, what makes Star Wars. So until then, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.